Frederick M. Dunn, OCSO, present abbot of Our Lady of Gethsemane, entered this monastery 50 years ago. One of his first moves was to seek information about his Trappist forefathers. Imagine his surprise to learn that they were not Trappists at all. They were Cistercians. Imagine his chagrin to find next to nothing written in English about these strong, silent, saintly men. Whatever information he gathered, he had to dig from books in French, German, or Italian. He found the digging hard work, so he resolved that if he were ever in a position of authority, one of his first moves would be to prevent future American aspirants to this life from going through the same agony. An early appointment as guest master brought him into contact with many interested visitors. Their innocent questions showed him how little was known about his order, and their naive remarks proved to him that much error was commingled with the little truth that was known. Some people asked if it were true that most Trappists became such because they were disappointed in love or with life, whether they had to dig a foot of their own grave every day that they lived, whether many lost the use of their voice because of their vow of perpetual silence. Such naivete provoked his smile, but it also deepened his resolve to give America the truth about the Trappists whenever he could. In 1935, he was elected abbot. Before 1936 was very old, his 42-year-old resolve was being executed. The Saga of Citeaux was taking shape. That name calls for explanation. It is a saga, for it is a history of a very heroic family. But it is the Saga of Citeaux only because it is a history of Cistercians. Many a person has read a history of Ireland without learning much about the Irish people who made that history. Likewise, many a person can learn much about America, but little about Americans, in books that bear the proud title of American history. That mistake must not be repeated here. So the history of this family will be told by telling the histories of this family's members. I frankly admit that my purpose is pragmatic. I want no modern juvenile to say, virtus laudatur et alget, virtue is praised and neglected. I want some moderns to say what Augustine said, si isti et istae cur non ego. If these men and women could do it, why not I? In other words, it is not admiration for Citeaux that I want to stir up. It is imitation of Cistercians. Hence, because we more quickly catch the American fervor and fervor for freedom from a Patrick Henry crying, "Give me liberty or give me death," rather than from any erudite analysis of the Constitution, the simplicity, humility, fidelity, and flaming love for God that was Citeaux will be wrapped in the warm flesh and blood of a faithful St. Robert, a humble St. Alberic, and an unshakably loyal St. Stephen Harding. Americans want tangibility. Before virtue will ever attract them, it must be incarnated, so these men and women will speak. Pardon my sudden pause, but allow me a sincere protest. I say these men and women will speak. I mean that literally. Dramatic dialogue will characterize this saga from beginning to end. It is not because I am fond of dialogue, but because I have always found life dramatic and many conventional lives of saints unlifelike. These men and women of Citeaux lived. They will be presented that way. This treatment may mislead some readers into classifying this book erroneously as a novel and as fiction. Actually, when an author dramatizes fact, he does not write fiction, nor does one who dramatizes history write a novel. The latter is a fictitious tale. History is never that. So call this, if you must label it, novel hagiography, or even novel history, but do not accuse me of writing fiction when I dramatize fact. This is beyond question. They are facts which I dramatize. Father Amadeus, OCSO, who helped me gather them, has rightly been called the human ferret. He burrowed into more manuscripts than I care to name, read careful studies, enthusiastic briefs, full-length biographies, and clever monographs. He then made available to me the results of his years of burrowing. As well as I could, I separated legend from actuality before casting the real facts into this presentation. Were I to give the complete list of our sources, I might dazzle. I would not greatly aid. Elsewhere in this edition appears a partial list. Its only practicality is that it may dissolve the doubts of a few skeptics. For myself, it permits opportunity to pay some of my debt of gratitude. I do owe these authors much. They furnished the substance. I merely supplied the form. There are others, too, who merit my thanks. There are the two censors of the order, Father Maurice, OCSO, of Our Lady of the Valley, Lonsdale, Rhode Island, and Father Alberic, OCSO, of our own Gethsemane. But my deepest gratitude goes to one who sacrificed most for the good of this book. I speak of my ever generous and always helpful brother, Reverend John P. Flanagan, Society of Jesus, of Boston, Massachusetts. Before closing this forward, I want to say that I accept full responsibility for every blemish in this book, that there are many I know only too well. It has been many years in the making, and more perfection may be rightly expected after such a lapse of time. But Trappists are adorers, not authors. Whatever time is given to composition is usually snatched from the real employment of their life, the sacrifice of praise, the sacrifice of the Mass, and the sacrifice of manual labor. Now let me state a fact, even though it may sound facetious. I say, let us give the devil his due. I mean it, for if these lives are lively, he put life into them. He complicated the romance between these men and their Maker. It was the solution of that complication that gives interest to this saga, just as it gave sanctity to these saints. There is always the devil to pay before a person can get to God. Read and see. Father M. Raymond, OCSO, 1944.